Press play to listen to this article by Florian Eder with ZOYA SHEFTALOVICH Send. Tips here. Tweet at Florian Eder. Listen to Playbook and view in your browser. BRB. European Parliament President Antonio Tajani has a message for the Commission: "We're closed, come back later." In a letter seen by Playbook, Tajani told Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker not to bother MEPs with any proposal for the mobilization of European Globalization Adjustment Fund and of the European Union Solidarity Fund from the 1st of March to the 1st of July 2019. The Romanian presidency was sent a similar note. Translation: accidents, floods and earthquakes are kindly asked not to occur until the next parliament takes over. Oh, and companies, please refrain from shutting down factories in the EU for now. A process for handling emergency situations during this period could be envisaged, Tajani generously added. Good morning. Explaining to voters the Parliament's internal handover procedures during this awkward time between legislatures, cited as the reason for the request, ahead of the EU election, might be a bit tricky. But this is a good reminder that the business of lawmaking is coming to a very swift end. Time flies when you're having fun. The last trilogues for which there's any hope of striking a deal can't technically happen much later than mid-March, Parliament and Commission officials said. Time flies, as Tajani reminded Juncker, and due to the electoral period and post-electoral preparation of the new legislature, the European Parliament will not hold any plenary sessions between the 18th of April and the 30th of June 2019. Election ahead report from the frontline. EPP's candidate for Commission President, Manfred Weber, sketched out his election program at a traditional gathering of supporters of his Christian Social Union (CSU) party on Ash Wednesday in Passau. Here are my takeaways from his test of the Bavarian waters. 1. Renewed appetite for talking Europe. Weber presented a classic center-right program, much to the joy of his supporters. His most cheered lines, references to big tech companies needing to pay their fair share of taxes, that we need to make sure we know who is staying with us in Europe, and thus cater for better protection of the EU's borders, plus that we won't be blackmailed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Simplifying complex business, with thousands of people in attendance to drink beer and listen to customarily forceful speeches over breakfast, the event is not ideally suited to detailed discussions of EU policy. If I am Commission President, I will instruct the services to end the accession talks with Turkey, Weber said, to applause and cheers. And so it seems there is a way to boil down EU politics, for European citizens beyond the bubbles, online or around Place Lux. 2. Lesson learned for the CSU. Political Ash Wednesday might be a curiosity to outsiders, but it has for decades been a big deal on Germany's political calendar, and not just for the CSU. The Bavarians often used it to fight with their CDU sister party in Berlin, leading to rather meager, by the CSU's standards, results in recent elections, or even to prove that the party is a broad church with plenty of varying opinions. Some of them very contrarian indeed. There was no animosity this time round. Weber and CSU chief Markus Söder praised newfound harmony within their marriage, and for the first time ever, a top CDU official, Secretary General Paul Ziemiak, was the CSU's guest. The real opponent in this campaign will be the far-right AfD, both Söder and Weber suggested, despite the two having been fierce opponents for most of their careers thus far. Parts of the AfD are on their way to the extreme right, said Söder, calling on AfD supporters in Germany to leave the Nazis in the AfD alone, and come back. 3. Mobilizing the crowd is key. And the hope is that making things personal will help. Weber told his audience he wants to, can, and will become Commission President with your support, urging them to go vote, and take their friends and relatives along. He also offered a between-the-lines glance at his strategy. Team Weber wants a good election result and the backing of his party, the CSU, CDU and the entire EP network, for this post-election bid to twist the European Council's arm. Söder's on board. This election doesn't end on May 26, said Söder, referring to steps 2 and 3 for any Commission presidential hopeful: getting a majority in the European Parliament, as well as the backing of a majority of EU leaders, said Söder. It might be impossible for us to get the federal chancellor, but the boss of the EU Commission, that's possible, and we'll fight for it, as is good custom when I travel. I wrote you a postcard from Lower Bavaria. The offers are coming in. Yes, we will talk, but we will not just say yes to the same business as usual and then, here and there, a little green flavor. Green co-spits in candidate By Eickhout declared. Meanwhile in Brussels, if Manfred Weber is willing to shift from his past policy and move in that direction, we can talk, we can form a majority, he said. If he wants to keep on moving to his right side, as the EP is doing in more and more countries, then there won't be a majority for him. Maya de la Bombe has more. Register today for Politico's event 2019 European Elections, the case for and against the EU, happening on April 10 in Brussels, presented by EGBA. The event will feature a joint interview with Laurence Finot, head of European Affairs at La République En Marche, and Jan Zahradil, Czech MEP and European Conservatives and Reformists spits-in candidate, followed by a panel discussion focusing on predictions on the upcoming elections. More information on the website. Today's business a de profundis for the asylum reform. EU interior ministers gathering in Brussels today are expected to make it clear the planned reform of the EU's asylum rules is dead. Is the official day to conclude that there's no agreement on asylum, one EU diplomat told our own Jacopo Bergazzi. We are talking about 7 items that compose the Common European Asylum System, CEAS, spanning from resettlement to taking and exchanging among EU countries, fingerprints at borders, to new powers for the EU's asylum agency EASO. Remember the backstory: some southern and central European countries were, and are, for different reasons, against a Commission push to unpack the reform and approve at least 5 of the 7 proposals, on which a consensus seems possible. During a meeting of EU ambassadors last week, Germany and France asked for a last try in securing progress among ministers. Jacopo writes in to tell us what's left of the grand plans, the European Border and Coast Guard. There is a council line, agreed last month among ambassadors, which foresees the setting up of a standing corps to respond to crisis situations, with up to 10,000 operational staff by 2027. Expect some attention-shifting boasting about that in due course. Oh, the irony. While Hungary's government brands, in its ad campaign against Juncker, the stalled reform of Brussels' usurpation, it found enough like-minded countries to block any agreement at all. Gender affairs, political group leaders, as in, the Conference of Presidents, are meeting today to discuss the remainder of the term, plenary agendas and so on. They will also discuss whether to pick a fight with governments over recent nominations opted by Parliament's Committee for Economic and Financial Affairs, for top EU finance jobs. ALDE leader Guy Verhofstadt will reiterate his request to postpone the nominations, his team told Playbook, until there's an answer, from both the Commission and the Council, to Tajani's letter about the matter. The Greens are fully on board, and actually claiming the credit for the idea of an arm wrestle. The EP is against the move, according to officials, and the S. Beyond Brussels single market. That old thing. In his letter to European citizens earlier this week, Emmanuel Macron painted a picture of a stronger, re-energized European Union, but played down the importance of the bloc's single market, point out Simon Marks and Joshua Posauner. Why so shy? Disagreements over the single market are flaring up all over the continent. Enter the anti-Macron. John Litchfield has this profile of Francois Ruffin, the left-wing newspaper editor, writer and prize-winning filmmaker, who is a potential contender to replace Emmanuel Macron in 2022, while also threatening the increasingly unpopular far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Today's must-read, The Case Against Amazon. To understand why antitrust investigators across Europe are turning their attention to Amazon, Politico's Simon van Dorp spoke to Dutch online entrepreneur Peter Sorber, whose story explains some of the issues with setting up shop on, and transferring data to, the U.S. e-commerce platform. Playbook interview, How to Win Friends and Influence People. International Cooperation and Development. Neven Mimica traveled to the South Pacific and Australia this month to discuss how Brussels and Canberra can collaborate on aid in the region. After delivering a keynote speech in Sydney on Wednesday, he sat down with Playbook's own ZOYA Sheftalovich to talk aid, Chinese influence and the Balkans. Over to ZOYA for this Playbook's interview. So why does the EU care about the South Pacific? Being involved in development programs so far from home can seem like a geographic paradox, Mimica acknowledged. But with EU member countries' overseas territories in the region, in political terms, we are neighbors here, couldn't possibly be the giant red elephant to the north. Is the EU seeking to work with Australia to counter China's influence in the region? I asked the Commissioner. Brussels and Beijing would like to come to a better level of understanding of each other's engagement patterns, and to forge more cooperation, more synergy, more coordination of our projects, and less competition, in the region, Mimica told me. The problem: how can the EU work with China, given Beijing's less than stellar human rights record and differing goals in the region? The process of converging our development impact and development contribution in the Pacific or elsewhere in the world with the Chinese approach, this will be a long-term process, Mimica admitted. We don't expect that we can turn the tide immediately after a few meetings or few leaders' summits. The solution? The EU wants to identify specific projects where it can work with China to test the waters, Mimica said, but this doesn't mean that even in these pilot projects that we should abandon our guiding principles relating to the rights-based approach to our development cooperation. The hope, then, is to find a lot more common ground with China, which wouldn't require neither China nor us to completely change the approach or to converge 100%. It is a process that requires patience, that requires good general approach, political will and political decision to go into that direction and not to keep the diverging path of our development engagement. Balkan News. Now that North Macedonia's name problems are behind it, you can expect the country to get back on track in accession talks soon, Mimica said. This will be on Commission's agenda before summer. Personal news: with a change of government in Croatia, I am certain I will not be here again after November, Mimica said of another term in Brussels. I would really like to find my next engagement somewhere in the area of international cooperation and development, outside the European Commission, somewhere in an international fora. Brexit Corner, a very handy guide on how to avoid chaos. The EU 27 ambassadors talked Brexit Wednesday, not that there was anything substantive to discuss, after a not-so-successful round of talks with Britain, according to diplomats. There's a widespread feeling that Britain, still, or perhaps again, believes in unicorns. The EU is seeking evidence of their existence and is open to further meetings to that regard. Charlie Cooper and Annabelle Dixon explain what happens now that Brexit looks like it is heading into extra time. Persona non grata, Venezuela expelled the German ambassador over what it called recurrent acts of interference in the country's internal affairs. Nicolas Maduro's government gave Daniel Kriener 48 hours to leave the country, accusing him of violating diplomatic norms. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said Venezuela's move is an incomprehensible decision that aggravates the situation. **** Tonight is the night. Watch live at 8 p.m. on our website. The first national debate between Belgian candidates for the EU election, hosted in Ghent by POLITICO in partnership with Politico. 8 candidates from Flemish and Walloon parties will exchange their views on the bloc's future and Belgium's special place within the EU, during a conversation moderated by our political editor Ryan Heath and Thomas Jacobs, PhD fellow from the CS****, over and out debate night. Starting tonight, national and local debates between MEP candidates are expected to run weekly through May. Tonight, Politico heads to Ghent, where Belgian candidates from 8 parties will go head-to-head. Bridging Belgium's language divide, and reflecting that all EU citizens in Belgium can vote for their MEPs, the debate will be held in English and co-moderated by Politico's Ryan Heath and Thomas Jacobs from Ghent University's Centre for EU Studies. Watch live on our homepage from 8 p.m. local time. Leaving and arriving, Jess Bailey has left his post as the U.S. ambassador to North Macedonia and is retiring from the State Department after 34 years, with Kate Burns, currently DCM in Athens, nominated to replace him. H.T. Daniel Lippman, happy birthday, Julie Ward MEP, Jean Plattard, Laura Alexander, Spirits Europe's Elizabeth Weisbecker, member of the German Bundestag Fabio De Masi. Thanks, Jacopo Baragazzi and our producer Gillian Deutsch. Subscribe to the Politico newsletter family, Brussels Playbook, London Playbook, EU Confidential, Sunday Crunch, EU Influence, DC Playbook, all our Politico Pro Policy morning newsletters.